have seen the torch of freedom pass from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dream some fought and died for in my heart becomes my own. I will strive to keep her promise, America, my home. America, America, may God bless America, and freedom reign across America, my home. From the shorelines to the prairies, to the cities great and small, we have reaped the fruits of justice and liberty for all. So with deep appreciation for the blessings we have.
Recognize it. You can't avoid having to deal with a character-disturbed person in your life, whether it be your boss or your co-worker, even your spouse. And dealing with a character-disordered person is probably one of the most difficult and frustrating things you'll ever have to do. So I hope you'll join the discussion here in just a moment, and we're going to be focusing on this problem that I consider to be the defining issue of our time. It's precisely why I wrote 2 of my 3 books. The first book, In Sheep's Clothing, was first published in 1996. It's now become an international bestseller, and it's regarded by most folks as the definitive guideline to understanding and dealing with manipulative personalities and character disturbance. My second book, Character Disturbance, published also by Parker's Brothers, came out in 2010. And I wrote that book because there are more disturbed characters out there, as most of you already know, than just manipulative personalities. And so I wanted to give the average layperson a guide to understanding and dealing with the host of character disordered people that they might encounter in their lives. And Character Disturbance has also become a very well-received book. You may have noticed also at the beginning of the program, my opening theme has a very patriotic flavor to it. And that's for a particular reason. It's a song, basically, that I wrote 2 years before 9/11. And it got a fair amount of attention following that fateful day. And there's a big reason why I'm going to continue playing it each time you tune in. And that's because I firmly believe that there is a fundamental relationship between the greatness and preservation of a free society and the kind of character that society's people have. Our greatness as a country has never been vested really in our military might or in our economic power. Really, when we've been great, and there have been times in our history when we've been really great, those times have to do with times that we have risen to the occasion and displayed the greatness among our people. So our greatness as a country has always depended upon people of good character to uphold our best values and our best ideals and to live up to our creeds. And because I firmly believe in that, I believe that our current character crisis places our freedoms at risk. You know, when good people are left alone, especially by their governments, when people of good character are just left to their own devices, they will naturally tend to do great things. They will build enterprises, they will help each other, and they will, in those pursuits, build great institutions and forge great societies. But when people behave recklessly and badly and the character of folks declines, this always invites governments especially to attempt to legislate the problem. And in so doing, our freedoms get restricted. And this happens every day. It's part of a growing trend that places all of our freedoms at risk. So freedom only works when you have people of good character respecting and honoring the freedom that we have. And that's a big value of mine and something that we'll be speaking to from time to time as the program goes on. Character matters. That's the title of the program. And the reason for the title is because character does matter. You can't think of a problem we have in this country, from the economic mess created on Wall Street a while back that almost caused a complete collapse of our economic system and cost all of us trillions of dollars. You can't think of a problem from those problems to the battles that rage on our streets each and every day that isn't related to the character crisis that we face. And whether people behave badly because of the cultural influences or whether people behaving badly cause some of the cultural factors that are at play is anyone's best guess. But whenever people do behave badly and cause problems, our legislature is always ready to craft new rules and regulations, but these only restrict our freedoms and they only burden the already responsible among us. So we want to stem that tide because problem characters, they don't really give a darn about the rules. They always find a way around them, including the very politicians, by the way, who write the rules. So I've made it my life's mission and my professional focus to tackle the character issue head on. I write about it. I blog about it. I mean to sound an alarm about those aspects of our culture that I think are not only having an enabling effect on this problem, but also perhaps even fostering the problem and rewarding it in many ways. But we can all do something about it. We can all help. We can and we must. Our common welfare and our personal safety and our precious freedoms and our way of life are all at stake. So I invite all of you to join a discussion. And in a moment, I'll be giving you out a number that you can call and we can talk candidly about the problems. I need to mention, however, that this program is not about making professional assessments or giving professional advice. That's not what it's about. We simply can't do that. It simply wouldn't be fair, and we couldn't do it accurately anyway from such a distance. But we do need to have a discussion about the principles that I think can help restore our society to a sane balance. And so in a moment, I'll give out the phone number and invite you to call in if you have questions or comments. Before I do that, maybe I should tell you a little bit about myself. I hold a doctoral degree in clinical psychology, and I have over 25 years experience working with disturbed characters and those people unfortunate enough to be in some kind of a relationship with them. I've written 3 books. In Sheep's Clothing, which I mentioned before. Full title is In Sheep's Clothing, Understanding and Dealing with Manipulative People. You can buy it on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. You can order it in your favorite bookstore. You can download it as an ebook in various formats, iBooks, Nook Reader, Kindle. And it's about those folks that I call the covertly aggressive personalities. These are the folks who look good on the surface and who can charm the socks off of you and who do everything to conceal their aggressive and manipulative intents. You don't really know what they're all about, what they're trying to do, how they attempt to get the better of you until they've already done it. It's kind of like getting whiplash. So In Sheep's Clothing is your guide to understanding these character types, knowing what really makes them tick, learning some tools that you can use to empower yourselves in relationships with these kinds of folks. That's what In Sheep's Clothing is all about. I also wrote the book Character Disturbance, The Phenomenon of Our Age, to describe the rest of the unsavory folks out there that you're likely to encounter in your life. Not everyone is just a manipulator. There's a variety of disturbed characters out there, from dyed-in-the-wool narcissists to outright psychopathic or sociopathic characters. And as I mentioned in Character Disturbance, there are very few folks, fortunately, who are at the extreme end of this spectrum. There are very few folks who qualify as an all-out-and-out psychopath. But in your lives, you're likely to encounter some folks who are somewhere on what I call the spectrum of character disturbance. In other words, they have just enough narcissism, just enough sociopathy, just enough other character impairments to make your life miserable. And my book, Character Disturbance, tells you how to understand this phenomenon, how to understand these kinds of folks, and what kinds of things work and don't work with them. You know, I hear from people every day. I get perhaps a dozen inquiries from people who are avid blog readers from my blog posts at manipulativepeople.com. I'll give that address out in just a bit. And uniformly, they tell me that they tried to get some help at some point in their relationship with a disturbed character, and it didn't work. They went to a therapist who they felt was also bamboozled or snowed over by the character disturbed person in their life. And so it didn't work. And in my book, Character Disturbance, I explain why that's so, why traditional methods are pretty useless when it comes to dealing with impaired characters. You see, we're dealing with a phenomenon in our age that is unique to our times. It's not that character disturbance hasn't always been with us. It has. But it hasn't been the problem that it has been until recently. And it hasn't been the dominant problem that mental health professionals have attempted to deal with. Mental health professionals, by and large, are trained to deal with a phenomenon that we call neurosis. This is how I was trained. And neurosis is that anxious response we have when we have inner conflicts, inner emotional conflicts that we're not even aware about, that we have largely repressed, that are unconscious to us and cause us some pain and distress. And usually those conflicts arise out of our debate between our conscience and some of our primal urges. And back in Sigmund Freud's time, you know, he formulated most of our traditional notions about neurosis. In his time, his age was the Victorian era. It was a very socially repressive time. It was a time in which if there were a motto for the time, like I like to tell people at my workshops, the motto for the time would be, don't even think about it. People at the time were so fretful about even thinking about acting on any of their basic urges that they were literally nervous wrecks. And they came into Freud's office. Most of these people were women, by the way, who were really even far more repressed than men were in the time. They came into his office with these very bizarre symptoms, paralyses that weren't real, and numbnesses that have no basis in physical reality, blindness that had no neurological cause. These were very bizarre symptoms and arose out of mounds of guilt that was totally out of proportion to reality. And he formulated all of his theories to explain this phenomenon. Now, I have to tell you, there hasn't been a case of what he called hysterical neurosis. There hasn't been a case like that in many, many years, over 50 years. And the reason for that is we live in a very different time. Ours is a time where if there were a motto for it, it would be just like the old Nike commercial used to suggest. Just do it. So instead of being in the kind of repressive time like Freud lived in, where he formulated his theories about the phenomenon of the time that he called neurosis, we live in an age where people just do it, where they don't have enough hang-ups, as it were, about the things that they do. And this causes problems. And this is the phenomenon of character disturbance. And the ways that mental health professionals were trained to intervene with people's problems, they don't apply to this phenomenon. They don't work. And that's the experience of most folks who have tried to get help. They perhaps dragged their character disturbed spouse into treatment, threatening divorce if they didn't come, and only to find that nothing got better, maybe things even got worse. Or they tried to use some of the advice that they got out of a self-help book in dealing with their character disordered boss or coworker, and found that that didn't help either. The rules that were written for understanding and dealing with neurosis, they don't apply for dealing with the disturbed character. And that's why I wrote my books. That's why I also blog at www.manipulative-people.com. This blog has a wonderful, large following, and it features not only a once-a-week article from me, but also a plethora of helpful comments and discussion from regular subscribers to the blog. These folks are great. They share their experiences. They make comments on the articles I've written. They offer examples of how they've used the principles that I've advocated in my writings and in my books to not only make significant changes in their own lives, but in empowering themselves and dealing more effectively with the character-impaired people in their lives. I also write for another blog, a popular international blog called Psychology, Philosophy, and Real Life. And it can be found at www.counseling, with two L's, by the way, because the Brits spell it that way, www.counselingresource, all one word, counselingresource.com. And I publish an article every week on that blog as well. I have a website at www.drgeorgesimon, that's all one word, drgeorgesimon.com. And you can find out more about me and my work at that website as well. Now I'm going to give you the phone number and then go on to tell you a little bit more about how I got started in this work and tell you a little bit more about the kinds of things that interest me and the kinds of things that we'll be talking about from time to time on this program. The number to call if you want to make a comment or if you have a question or you want to share an experience with a character-disturbed people in your life, the phone number to call is area code 718-717-8296. That's area code 718-717-8296. And that's the number to call with any questions you might have or comments, any instances that you want to share with the listeners about either how you've dealt with manipulative or other character-disturbed people in your life or difficulties that you're having trying to find a way to do that. I got started in this work probably close to 25 years ago because most of the problems that I was dealing with, as I mentioned before, did not stem from an individual's disturbance of the neurotic variety, but rather problems in their character formation. It wasn't that they were overly hung up or repressed or dealing with bizarre symptoms that they needed to get rid of, but they were having problems in their lives, and their lives were a shipwreck because they had not yet matured in their character development to a point where they could function in a responsible way. And it wasn't their feelings or their unmet needs that were a problem. It was their attitudes, the way that they chose to look at things, the kinds of ways that they tended to think about things, and most especially the behavioral habits they developed over time, the ways that they had kind of learned to deal with the world, how to see the world and deal with it, how to respond to life's stresses. This style that they developed was actually the problem in their life. They weren't really looking at the world in a way that enabled them to function responsibly. They weren't thinking about things in a way that enabled them to function responsibly, and because of that, their lives were a shipwreck. I also found out that the traditional ways that I had been trained to help people weren't helping them very much. It wasn't that I was ill-trained. I was trained very well, I thought. And, of course, in many training programs these days, you get pretty eclectic training in a wide variety of schools of thought. And I had been trained in all the major schools of thought. Yet nothing I seemed to do seemed to make a real difference, especially in the lives of the disturbed characters I was seeing. Now, everything I'd been taught to do worked wonderfully with the victims in problem relationships. These more neurotic folks seemed to respond very well to all the traditional things I tried to do. It was just the folks whose problems stemmed more from who they were as a person, the kind of person they'd shaped themselves up to be, the kinds of values they had adopted, the ways they tended to think about things, and especially the ways that they tended to approach the challenges of life. These folks were not helped by any of the traditional things that I tried. And so I basically had to kind of reinvent a therapy. Now, since that time, a type of therapy has been developed that we call cognitive behavioral therapy. And this therapy is a highly specialized form of therapy that focuses on, just as the name implies, both cognitive issues as well as behavior. what we know from science is that there's an inextricable link between the way we think about things and the way we behave. Anybody that has borne witness to any of the really dangerous things going on in the world right now with suicide bombings and other terror campaigns conducted by ideologues that have a view of the world and of their place in the world, and a view of how they believe that their particular religious ideology dictates to them that they should conduct their affairs. Anybody who is familiar with this phenomenon knows how serious it can be when people truly believe a certain way. And that way of believing about things, that way of viewing the world, that way of thinking about life and its purpose can really influence your behavior. People have been known to go to some great lengths carrying some of these extreme ideologies with them. So what we think really matters. How we think about things, the attitudes that we hold, the values that we hold, they really influence us. And what cognitive behavioral therapy tends to focus on with the disturbed character is those thinking errors, as we call them, that predispose disturbed characters to act in irresponsible ways. We also know that behavior and the results that we get from behavior, the consequences we experience from behavior, tend to influence the way we think about things. So the other thing that cognitive behavioral therapy does is it focuses on inviting a person to make changes in their behavior by taking small steps, changing little things over time, steadily getting to bigger steps, and then learning from that experience that perhaps taking a different approach, looking at life a little bit different way, will change your attitude about things. So the mode of therapy for character disturbance is cognitive behavioral therapy, not traditional psychotherapy. And in that cognitive behavioral therapy are some highly specialized techniques that we use to deal with character disturbance. Now, as I said, I got started in this many years ago because this is the phenomenon that I was facing. I also was facing the fact that many people whose underlying problem was character disturbance had received all kinds of diagnoses from all kinds of mental health professionals along the way, none of them focusing on their character pathology. And this was a big problem. This was a big problem because not only didn't they get better, but many times they were placed on medications that to some extent may have controlled some symptoms. You know, perhaps a really volatile character was given the label of having a bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder, by the way, is a very real disorder, but it's often overdiagnosed, and the diagnosis is often conferred upon people who don't actually have the disorder and whose underlying problems stem from something else. However, if you give someone who has an impulse control problem medications that in addition to controlling genuine bipolar disorder, also really do help people control their impulses, well then, perhaps it can be a little bit of help. But my point being that folks would come to me and they'd received all kinds of diagnoses and perhaps gotten some degree of help, but no one bothered to focus on the core issue, which was that they had a personality or a character problem. Maybe they didn't have a full-blown character disorder. Maybe they weren't an out-and-out sociopath. Maybe they weren't a dyed-in-the-wool narcissist. But they had a character problem, and that wasn't the focus of treatment. And so they didn't get any better. Maybe they got symptomatically a little better. Maybe they got a little bit less volatile. Maybe they got a little bit less ornery. Maybe the use of an antidepressant made them a little less edgy. But it didn't really cramp their style of relating to other people. And so it didn't really address the core problem. And they didn't get better. So as a result, I started developing certain techniques to really address the problem. What I found, very surprisingly, many of my colleagues at the time suggested two things. And you'll hear this if you've been in therapy, or if you should go into any kind of traditional helping situation with any kind of a helping professional, whether it be a professional counselor or a licensed therapist, you'll get the same response. Personality disorders, really, we can't do anything about them. That's what you'll hear. You'll hear that basic personality does not change, and therefore all we can do is we can address some of the other symptomatic things. You know, we'll focus on, say, improving communication skills, or we'll focus on intimacy skills, or we'll focus on this, or we'll focus on that. We'll not touch the personality issues because, you know, frankly, that's a futile endeavor. But what I found is that when you actually start paying attention to someone's personality problems, and you address those problems directly using the correct techniques, something remarkable happens that doesn't happen otherwise. And that is, you can see small changes occur. Now, I'm not here to tell you that character disturbance is an easily treated and quickly treated problem. It's not. It's arduous work. But when you tend to it, and you tend to it correctly, changes do occur. They can occur. And they do occur. Perhaps slowly, perhaps not as quickly as we'd like, perhaps not as dramatically as we'd like, but they do occur. And with time, and with the right motivation, which also has to be cultivated, folks can and do change. So this is something I really learned very early on in my work in this area. And so I actually began to specialize in two areas. I specialized in dealing with those people who are in relationships with disturbed characters. That work, by the way, is easy. Dealing with your, I affectionately call them average neurotic individual who is unfortunately hooked up with an impaired character, dealing with these kinds of folks is a joy. It's relatively easy, and I found it very edifying to equip them with empowerment tools that would allow them to not only overcome the emotional scarring of the kinds of abusive situations that they've been in, but also to deal more effectively in the future with other character impaired people that they would meet. And also to make some better judgments about people in the future so that they could spot potentially problematic relationships early on and take some preventative action. So that was one area that I specialized in. And then I also started specializing in actually dealing with disturbed characters, including people with full-blown personality and character disorders. And I actually got to like the work because it's really not so bad once you give up all the old notions we have about what really makes people tick, and what we really need to do to help them change. Once you give up those old notions and start using the appropriate techniques and dealing with the problem as the core problem, things get better. So that actually became rather pleasant work. I also had to overcome another thing that many therapists struggle with, and that is when you're dealing with a person with a personality or character disorder, or even a milder character or personality disturbance, they're not necessarily ready for change. And so you have to be ready for the fact, as a therapist, that a person might not be ready to come back and deal with you. However, you can't placate a personality with a serious character disturbance and ever be trusted again. You can't not call it like it is, or tiptoe around the real issues, or get bamboozled, or even manipulated, and then ever have the person's confidence when and if they ever are ready to consider change. When that day comes, the person's only going to come back to the person they know they can trust, because trust is a big issue for most character-impaired people anyway. And if you haven't nailed it right on the head, and if you're not willing to call it as it is, and if you don't have the tools to deal with it effectively, they're not going to come back and see you when the time is ready. And that's something I really had to learn. So, and I can't tell you how many times, frankly, that 5, 8, 10, maybe even 15 years later, there would be a knock on my door, and it would be somebody I'd seen years ago who heard every word that I had said all those many years ago, actually took in everything I had to say. They weren't ready to receive it, really. They weren't ready to digest it. They certainly weren't ready to accept it and endorse it themselves, but they did hear it. And they reflected upon it, and now the time had come, whether they'd hit some kind of bottom in their lives as a result of things going wrong and their lives becoming a shipwreck, or whether they had simply grown tired, sick and tired of being sick and tired themselves, and worn out because their old ways of doing things just didn't seem to do it for them anymore. Whatever the case may be, they were at a point in their lives where they were willing and open to consider change. And the reason they knocked on my door as opposed to somebody else's door is they knew they could get the straight stuff. And that meant a lot. And that has validated me in my work over the years. Plus, I get tremendous validation from people who have read my books. Close to 400,000 people have read In Sheep's Clothing, and I get about 1,000 emails a year from people saying just this one thing, that their lives were changed simply by adopting a new perspective, the perspective that I advanced in the book. As soon as they began to see their lives and the people in their lives, especially the people in their lives that were causing them problems, in a new and different way, and cast off some old harmful notions and adopted a new perspective, everything got better for them. And that's really validating. I mean, I can't get enough of those kinds of emails. I never tire of hearing from someone in that regard. So I invite you to call in. Again, the number is 718-717-8296. 718-717-8296. If you have a story to share, if you have a question to ask, even if you have a disagreement with some of what I've been saying, feel free to chime in. I remember very early in my career when I was doing workshops until about 7 or 8 years ago when I started having some medical issues that kept me sidelined from the talk circuit. Until then, I was doing workshops very regularly, and in my career I've done over 300 workshops for professionals as well as lay people. But early on in my career, when I would give workshops and I would put forth this new perspective, and I would basically say that our old notions about what makes certain people tick are not correct, and that we needed to change those notions if we're ever going to help people change. People did not cotton to this. As a matter of fact, my professional peers in workshops, had frequent disagreements with me, and very early on, I even had the embarrassing experience of having some people who basically couldn't stomach the new model walk out. Now, 4 or 5 years later, as I continued to do workshops, and as the cognitive behavioral model became more dominant, and some of the old models started to give way to its superiority, and as more and more people started, more and more professional researchers started keying into this very issue, there are some folks that have done landmark research. For instance, Dr. Robert Hare in Canada has done tremendous research in the area of the most serious character disorder, psychopathy. And he's done probably more research on, and he and his colleagues have done more research on psychopathy in recent years than any other. And he's got a book out called Without Conscience that speaks to one of the key differences that I always talked about in my workshops between what I call mostly neurotic folks and mostly character disturbed folks. In my workshops and in my books, I make the point that whereas neurotics generally suffer from too much conscience, in other words, an overactive conscience that is oppressive and makes them feel guilty about every little thing, disturbed characters are the folks who don't have enough apprehension about the things that they let themselves do. They don't have enough qualms of conscience. Their conscience is inadequately developed. And in the case of the most severely disordered character, the psychopath, conscience can be lacking altogether. I want to give you a recent example that is in the news. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with the case of Miranda Barbour. That's Barbour. Miranda Barbour is a 19-year-old woman who had initially made a call to 911 after killing someone, that she had been attacked and had to defend herself. But the forensic evidence just didn't add up. And so as the investigation proceeded, it turned out that this then 18-year-old woman and her boyfriend, Elite, had been out to celebrate two events. They were out to dinner to celebrate their time being together. I think it was a 1-month anniversary. And it was also Veterans Day. So they wanted to celebrate the day in a special way. And they went out to dinner. And then for another little treat, they thought they would treat themselves. This was Miranda's idea, by the way, to a killing. Miranda had done her own killings in the past, she says. This time she wanted her boyfriend's participation. Actually, not boyfriend. I think they had married at this point. To make a long story short, they went out to celebrate by luring. They had lured a person on Craigslist for a rendezvous. The person thought it would be a romantic rendezvous, and this man gets in the car, and Elite, the boyfriend or the husband, puts a rope around his neck, or a cord around his neck, and strangles him, while Miranda stabs him multiple times and kills him. And this is the way they celebrated their anniversary together and Veterans Day. Now, this woman has no qualms of conscience. This was a cold-blooded attack. And there are two things that psychopaths can do that nobody else can do. And this is that they can be completely devoid of empathy for another human being, so that they have absolutely no conscience and no qualms of conscience in the committing of a crime. They can commit the most dastardly, predatory acts without one shred of anxiety or being unnerved in any way. That thing that we call conscience is just not there. That's why Robert Hare calls his book Without Conscience. In my book, by the way, Character Disturbance, I call this personality type the predatory aggressive. It's one of 5 aggressive personality types. And I call it the predatory aggressive because these are the people who prey on others. They have a most malignant type of narcissism whereby they really do think that they are superior creatures to the rest of us, and therefore they have a right to prey upon us because they see us as creatures as low as the ants. So in the same manner in which we might step on a spider without feeling too terribly guilty about it, they would squash out the life of another human being without any qualms, because they think of themselves as superior creatures. They think of us as worthy of nothing and the lowest of the lows, and therefore fair prey, P-R-E-Y, and that's exactly what Miranda and her husband did in this crime. The other thing psychopaths can do is, if they have any degree of empathy or capacity for empathy or for other normal human emotions, and they have any conscience at all, they can do this thing that we call compartmentalization, which means they can turn it off like a light switch. They can put it in like Al Gore used to say about Social Security, a lockbox. They can wall off any emotion and any feelings they might have, and they can quiet any qualms of conscience, put it in kind of a mental lockbox, and then just do their dastardly deed. An interesting example of this, I don't know how many of you have seen the movie version of Truman Capote's book In Cold Blood, but there's a scene in the movie that is based in fact, in which the two thugs go to this rural home in Kansas, I believe, and they're basically trying to burglarize this home. They needed some cash, and they didn't get much. They're on the lam. They're trying to get money. They picked the wrong home to burglarize because there wasn't much money there. But they also realized that these people could identify them, and so therefore they had to be eliminated, because these folks did not want to go to prison. They'd already been in trouble with the law, and they did not want to go back to jail, so they planned in cold blood to kill these folks. Well, one of the residents of this home was elderly, and she was shivering. She was not only cold, but she was terrified of these intruders being in her home. And one of the psychopaths there to do this dastardly thing gave her a rocking chair in which to sit and brought her a shawl to make her comfortable, and showed, what appeared to be some degree of human empathy before blowing her away. And this is what psychopaths can do. And that's why, I suppose, Mr. Capote appropriately titled his book In Cold Blood, because this is the kind of acts that these extremely disturbed characters are capable of. Fortunately for us, only about 2 to 5%, the estimates range, of the population has this condition. So it's a very small percentage, thank goodness. But as I make the point in my book, character disturbance exists along a spectrum, much like autism we now know exists on a spectrum. We used to think there were these discrete disorders. We've done away with that now. We know that there are some people who are a little bit autistic and some folks who are fully autistic, and there are some folks in between. Well, character disturbance is like that. It exists along a spectrum or a continuum. And not everybody has a full-blown character disorder, and not everybody's an outright narcissist or a psychopath. But the folks these days, many folks, a large proportion of folks, have some degree of character disturbance, and you're going to encounter it at some point in your life. And if you already have encountered it, how miserable it can make your life. I want to tell you before I forget, too, that I also have on YouTube a series of excerpts from some upcoming webinars that have been getting some views. Some of them have quite a few thousand views. They give you an example of the kinds of workshops that I do, most of which will be done via webcasts or webinars, because it's a little easier on me these days than traveling to various cities. But I also am going to be planning some workshops, and if you are a member of an organization or know of an organization that might be interested in sponsoring a workshop, you can always contact me. A good email address to get a hold of me, which I think is posted on the UCY TV website, is George K. Simon, all one word, GeorgeKSimon at sbcglobal.net. And I do workshops for professional groups, especially for therapists who are coming to terms with the fact that more and more of their clients are dealing with character disturbance as opposed to other quote-unquote neurotic symptoms, and need different kinds of intervention than they were trained to deliver. So I train these professionals in how to do highly specialized cognitive behavioral therapy that actually can impact and make a difference with character disturbed people. I also do training workshops and seminars for the lay public, helping people to empower themselves in their relationships with their character disturbed bosses or coworkers or their spouses, their parents, their kids, I have an interesting chapter in Sheep's Clothing about a manipulative child that I probably have gotten more emails and comments about that one chapter than any other chapter in the book over the years. Kids, I think, are kind of natural-born manipulators. So I do those kinds of workshops and training seminars. And I also consult the business organizations who are trying to make their workplaces more, shall we say, character-friendly, and who want to foster better cooperation among their workers and set a corporate culture that fosters not only creativity and productivity, but fosters a pleasant workplace within which to work. And that, of course, means that you have to have folks who are not of the character where they're going to wreak havoc in the lives of their fellow co-workers. So I do all those kinds of workshops, and anybody interested in that is welcome to call in, welcome to contact me via email. You can also visit my blog, read any of the articles you want. You can contact me through the blog. There's a contact feature on the blog. You can find out more about my work just by going to www.manipulative-people.com or read some of my articles at www.counselingwith2lsresource.com. Visit my website at www.drgeorgesimon.com. Or you can call here into the program at 718-717-8296. As always, we'll be happy to discuss whatever is on your mind and deal with the issues at hand. In just a moment before we close, you're going to be hearing our theme again. I'm real proud of this musical composition, America My Home. I believe very strongly in this country and the principles upon which this country was founded. I think we're the last best hope of freedom on earth. I sincerely believe that in the pit of my soul. And I believe that it's our individual and collective obligation to uphold our best ideals, because only when we are of the character that we were meant to be will our country have the character that it was meant to have. And we need to be great again. We haven't always been great. We haven't. We've had some very dark times in our history. But we've had some great periods in our history as well. We have had periods in our history where we really have been that bright beacon, that shining star to all the world. And we simply must be that again. We must individually be better people so that we can be a better society. We have to stare the cultural aspects of our society that are fostering this disturbance among us straight in the eye and address it directly. We have to have an open and honest discussion about these issues. We have to be unafraid. And in the process, we will restore our greatness. And the world needs this. The world has always looked to the United States of America as that bastion of freedom and goodwill. This is a wonderful country. But
from hand to yearning hand, and the vision of our fathers spread hope throughout this land, as the dreams some fought and died for in my heart become